Good morning. As you can see, we are doing a series on movies, and this week is Cars 3, which typically, at least in my experience, when you get to the third or fourth or fifth of a movie, it's no good anymore, right? But this one actually is quite solid. It's an enjoyable movie, and it's about Lightning McQueen, who in Cars 1, we find out is this incredible race car, and he's winning all these races, and he's at the top of his class and is the best of the best. And then Lightning gets a little older, and all of a sudden, the newer, faster, more technologically savvy race cars come in, and they start beating him. And Lightning McQueen finds himself in this place where he feels like he's being pushed aside, but he doesn't want to. He's a competitor. He wants to win. He wants to strive to do the best he can. So he tries again. He gets this training regimen going using some of this newer, later technology, and he still loses. And then he pushes himself harder and harder and harder until you see in that one scene where he crashes. He wrecks out, and he finds himself down in the dumps because he's put it as his identity, his everything, into being this winning race car driver. And he tries to get back. And you guys, the yellow car is Cruz Ramirez. And Cruz comes in and starts trying to train him, starts trying to get him back on his feet. And through a number of circumstances, they meet a bunch of these old race car drivers who are stuck away in this old rickety bar. And they start encouraging him and teaching him and using lines, like I said, it's not about how fast you are, it's about how much you know. And the tone kind of shifts from Lightning McQueen being the winning race car to all of a sudden realizing that Lightning McQueen is the next generation of these old cars. Doc Hudson was his mentor, the guy that drove him around this dirt track in Cars 1. He starts to realize that he is the new Doc Hudson. He's the new guy that's going to be coaching Cruz Ramirez, this new race car. And it's a story that I think we need to hear as a church, especially on days like today when we celebrate significant milestones in people's lives, when we celebrate graduation, when we celebrate moving from one stage of life to another. Several years ago, more than I'd like to admit now, when I graduated from college, Katie and I were dating. We were getting engaged, and I wasn't sure what I was going to be doing. I knew I wanted to do ministry, but I wasn't sure how that was going to play out exactly at the time. And I got this call from a church in Knoxville, and they hired me as a student minister. I don't know why, but they did. And I met this guy named Ben Lutz Jr. And Ben Lutz was a leader at the church, but he became so much more to me. I was fresh out of college and full of ideals. I was newlywed and had no clue what I was doing as a husband. I was fresh into ministry, and to be honest, I was a bit of an idiot. I was bullheaded and pushed my way through things that I shouldn't have pushed my way through things. I lacked any and all patience. I made some seriously stupid decisions those first 4 years of ministry. And Ben stood with me through all of it. And not only did he stand with me through all of it, he would meet with me. And I'd tell him, man, Ben, I'm just so frustrated with this. Or, man, Ben, I just don't know how to handle this. And it wasn't a formal setup. It would be while he was helping me put a hitch on my truck, or he was helping me fix the AC at my house, or whatever it was. It was while we were doing life together. We would have these conversations, and I'd tell Ben what was going on in my life. And then Ben, he wouldn't necessarily solve the problem, but he would just tell me a story. He would tell me a story about, I messed up with that too when me and Carla first got married, and here's what I learned. And he would tell me what he'd learned. Or he would sit there and he'd be like, when I was first starting to work he worked at Johnson University. When I first started to work at Johnson, I did this and it didn't work out well for me. I messed it up, and here's what I learned. Or when we were working on the house, he was really good at that type of stuff. He'd be like, well, here's what I learned, and here's what you don't want to do. So you need to fix it this way, because I did this once, and he'd tell a story, and he'd tell me how it went horribly wrong for him. And I'd get to learn from that. Like I said, it wasn't a formal setup. It was life walked out together. It was a man who was a step or two ahead of me in life. He had high school students and middle school students that were his kids. And so he was several years beyond me in life. But he came and he met with me. He met me where I was. And he walked with me. I needed that. And the truth is, we all need that. We need the wisdom of the people that are walking out life a few stages in front of us. We use the word mentorship a lot for this. It's this idea of someone that has been in something long enough that they have a little bit of wisdom that they can then help someone who's starting out. They mentor the person that is younger or newer in whatever it is with them. And we struggle with that as a society. And I think we struggle with it, and this is a little bit of a soapbox for me, because we live in an educational-driven society, all right? So a lot of times we think that the person up here with the mic tied to their shirt knows what they're doing and has something to share that's worthwhile. We think that the person standing up in front of the classroom is the only person that can teach. We think that the people that stand in front of us are the people who teach. But the reality is, we all have wisdom and experiences that we need to leverage for the generations that are coming behind us. You are all teachers. Whether you're just now graduating high school or whether you are up in your 70s or 80s, you all have something to share with the generations that are coming after you. We need to leverage our experiences. We need to leverage the wisdom that God has given us through the pains and the trials and the heartaches that we face in life in order to help the next generation coming behind us not have to face those same things. And just as in Cars 3, we idolize the youth. And I'm not talking youth as in like the graduates necessarily, but we idolize youthfulness. We idolize the newest, the latest, the greatest, right? If we don't have an iPhone, I don't even know what the newest one is, 12, right? If we don't have an iPhone 12, then my iPhone 4 is like lame. You have an iPhone 4? What are you doing, right? And we do the same thing with our bodies, with our image. If we don't dress in a hip, cool way, or if we maybe have wrinkles around our necks or under our eyes or whatever it may be, then that's not acceptable. We got to look like we're 21, right? Or 22 as the Swift song says. We have to always look that youth. And if we start to look age, if we start to have gray hairs like I do in my beard, which is driving me nuts, I got to be honest, then we start to think that we're over the hill and it's all downhill from here. And that we got to dye our hair or dye our beards or whatever it is to get rid of that gray so that we can then have some sort of relevance because all of a sudden we're young again because of how we look. We idolize that. We lift that up. And to be honest, that goes against the biblical precedents. In Job 12:12, it says, "Wisdom is with the aged, and understanding in length of days." Proverbs 16:31 says, "Gray hair is a crown of glory. It is gained in a righteous life." Hear that again. Gray hair is a crown of glory. It is gained in a righteous life. In our society, how many people that have gray hair can honestly say, I feel like I have a crown of glory because my hair's gray? Right? That's not the way we think or we feel about this at all. In Proverbs 20:29, it says, "The glory of young men is their strength, but the splendor of old men is in their gray hair." Deuteronomy 32:7 says, "Remember the days of old. Consider the generations long past. Ask your father, and he will tell you. Your elders, and they will explain to you." Today, I want to encourage us into a path of deeper community, where the older generations encourage and walk with the younger generations. And I want to encourage us to step out of a generation where we as a church separate the generations. And I'm not necessarily talking about programs and that sort of thing. What I'm talking about is in life, we tend to collect in our huddles where we're comfortable instead of reaching down to the generations that are coming behind us and encouraging them and walking aside them and pointing them towards something better. There's two aspects I want to talk about. The first is that you have something to share. You have something to share. In life, we have all sorts of different experiences, and all of us are a collection of different experiences, of different victories, of different successes, of different heartaches, and of different failures. And we have wisdom to share through those. Don't think you have nothing to share, because you do. In Ephesians 4:11-16, it says this. It says, so Christ himself gave the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, the pastors, and the teachers to equip his people for works of service, so that the body of Christ may be built up until we all reach unity in the faith and in the knowledge of the Son of God and become mature, attending to the whole measure of the fullness of Christ. Then we will no longer be infants, tossed back and forth by the waves, and blown here and there by every wind of teaching and by the cunning and craftiness of people and their deceitful scheming. Instead, speaking the truth in love, we will grow to become, in every respect, the mature body of him who is the head, that is Christ. From him, the whole body, joined and held together by its supporting ligaments, grow and builds itself up in love, as each part does its work. Here's what I want to draw out of this, is two things. It's saying that Christ gave us, and it talks about apostles, prophets, evangelists, pastors, and teachers, and you may have never put that title to yourself, but that's okay, because he's given each of us some sort of ability to encourage, to teach, to share. He's given us all different life experiences that we need to share. It doesn't have to be a formal setup where you're only listening to the person standing up here or in the classroom. He's giving us life to share. And when we share that life together, when we speak the truth in love, we will grow up together to maturity. But it takes us reaching out. It takes us reaching out and sharing and encouraging the generations coming before us. Every single one of us has the opportunity to leverage who we are for the benefit of others, and specifically those outside the family. I'm 100% behind parents being the primary disciplers of their kids, because they are. In Deuteronomy 6, it says that God gives the command that we as parents are to teach and admonish and to train our children, and we are. But as any parent will tell you, there's those times when your kids will not listen, where it doesn't matter what you say, it goes in one ear and out the other. And I haven't experienced that too much, thankfully, with my kids because they're small, but I've worked with students long enough to see it a lot. And to see the student and the parent come to me and be like, can you tell them this? Because they need to hear it. And you tell them it, and it's like they get it. And the parent's like, what? I've been saying that for months, right? You've all been there if you've been a parent of a teenager. And we need us as a family, as a church family, to speak into the younger generation's lives. Andy Stanley, when speaking on mentorship, he likened it to a treasure chest. So he had this treasure chest, and it was full of all these different things that represented different aspects of our life. And it's things that we don't often see as treasures. And sometimes things that really are a lot of pain, that when we look back on, they hurt. But in life, they are treasures because they bring wisdom. One of them that he pulled out of his treasure box was marriage. Some of us have had, and I'll say some of us, not me yet, some of us have had marriages that have lasted 40 years, 50 years. And you've done something right in that to obviously have your marriage last in that way. That needs to be shared. That needs to be leveraged for the benefit of the generations that are coming up. Some of us have had marriages that have been broken. We have marriages that have failed. We have marriages that are floundering, and we don't know which way is up, and we don't know if it's going to last till tomorrow. That is something that needs to be leveraged. That pain, that heartache, teaches more than the good times. There's more to learn in the mistakes of life than there is in the victories. And those mistakes, however hard they may be to share, they need to be leveraged your experience needs to be leveraged for the benefit of those coming behind you. The second thing he pulled out was money. He pulled money out of the treasure box. It's kind of ironic. Some of us have handled money well. Some of us haven't. Some of us have done well with the way we handle our finances, and others haven't. And we need to leverage those experiences those victories and those successes and those defeats and those failures. Because if we don't teach those, if we don't leverage those to the generations coming behind us, they'll make the same mistakes we do. The third thing is conflict. Very few of us ever walk through life without any form of conflict. And in every conflict, there's a lesson to be learned. We need to share those lessons with the generations coming behind us. The other thing is suffering. Some of us have suffered loss that is unimaginable. Some of us have had pain that rips at the very core of who we are. We need to leverage that for the benefit of those coming behind us. An example of our life from that was when Katie, 2 years ago, had to spend 10 weeks in the hospital. And during that 10 weeks, she was away from home. We got to take the kids in to see her maybe an hour, maybe two on a good day at most. But outside of that, she was sitting in a hospital bed alone for 10 weeks. And that whole 10 weeks, she didn't know what the end result was. She didn't know if our little girl was going to make it or not. We were hopeful, but she didn't know. And that was a really, really, really difficult time for her and for us. And during that time, our friend Beth stepped in. She'd been a longtime friend of ours, but at that time, all of a sudden, Beth realized who she needed to be walking with. Because Beth had walked through suffering. Beth had lost a lot of family members. She had lost her husband. She had walked through different pains and different trials that really ripped at the core of who she was. And Beth walked with her. Not necessarily telling her at the end that every day was going to be good, but telling her stories of hope, telling her stories of encouragement, telling her that no matter what happens at the end of this, that the sun will rise on the next day. Beth was who Katie needed in that moment. The next was spirituality. He pulled spirituality out of the treasure box. Because all of us have walked a different life when it comes to our relationship with Jesus. Some of us are fresh into it, and it's a new thing, and we're excited. Some of us have been walking with Jesus since before we can remember. Some of us have serious doubts. Some of us have serious struggles with our faith. And some of us have different things that the thorns in the flesh, as Paul said, that we really struggle with and we don't know what to do with. They're the things that we don't like to talk about. But God has put them in our lives so that we can learn from them and so that we can encourage the generations coming behind us, so that we can leverage those for the next generation. The next is parenting. We've all parented in different ways, and no group of people needs mentoring more than new parents. You can ask any mom who has a week-old baby, and they're just sitting there going, I don't know what to do. They keep crying all the time. They poop and pee and they cry, and that's all they do. I don't know what to do. And you're in this mode of help me, help me, help me, help me, help me. Because you feel lost. You don't know which way is up. Your life has been flipped upside down. So we have 4 kids, and people are sometimes like, hey, what's it like going from 3 kids to 4 kids? And we're always like, it's nothing like going from no kids to 1 kid. Because that changed everything. We need to leverage our experience as parents for the benefit of those who are getting ready to be or are new parents. When Katie and I first moved to Virginia, where we just moved here from, we had one child, Gwennon, our oldest, was a month old when we moved. And that was a trip. We were rolling along in the big Penske truck, me driving, Katie in the passenger seat, and Gwennon smack dab in between us, just bouncing along on this truck. And we got to this new place where we knew no one. And we were new parents. And this couple named John and Leslie stepped into our lives, and they said, hey, we want to have you over for dinner. It was one of the first weeks we were there. And we were excited. We went over and we had dinner with them, and it was a regular thing. About once a month, they would have us over for dinner. And every time, it wasn't like they were sitting there teaching us and telling us what to do, but every time we would just start talking about life. We met with them for about 6 years before they ended up moving away. And for that 6 years, we met with them very consistently. And they would come to us and say, hey, man, it's okay. It gets better. Yes, 2 is a hard age, especially when you have a 3-year-old and a 2-year-old. It's hard. But it will get better. When we were talking about having our 3rd kid, when we were talking about having Carrick, We went to them and we were talking about it, and we were like, do we do it now? I don't know. What are we going to do? And I'll never forget John saying this. He said, Tim, he was like, when my youngest graduated from high school, I regretted not having more. He was like, there is no regrets to having more. Your bag cannot be full of too many kids. He's like, enjoy them, bring them along, walk with them, and he was like, you'll never regret it. John and Leslie walked with us through a time where we felt a little lost, where we were new parents. They were significant people in our lives. And the second thing is this. We need to look for someone to mentor you. If you are just graduating, if you are in a stage of life, all of us need someone to walk with us. And here's why. We all have blind spots. We all need insight, and we all need encouragement. Proverbs 11:14 says, without guidance, people fall, but with many counselors, there is deliverance. Proverbs 19:20 says, listen to counsel and accept discipline, that you may be wise the rest of the days of your life. We need insight because it's foolish to think that we can face this life alone. And there's something about those of us who are younger, and I still try to put myself in that age bracket, those of us who are younger who think we're invincible, who think very highly of our own abilities, who think very highly of ourselves in general, and we think that we don't need help. We think that we can just talk to our peers and make our way through it just fine. I call it the sophomore in Bible college syndrome. Because what happens in Bible college, at least what I saw happen a lot when I was there, was the freshmen come in knowing nothing. You hit your sophomore year and you're like, I got this Bible thing down. I got it. Let's go. And then your junior year, you're still learning. And then all of a sudden your senior year, it's like they tear you down and they say, here's why you know nothing. And you walk away humble, or you should. But that sophomore in Bible college period is when you think you know what's going on. You think you know everything. You think you don't need help. But you do. You need someone who has walked before you, who has the wisdom to point out the things that you're not seeing. Second is encouragement. This generation that's coming up right now through high school and middle school and in college is the most anxious generation there's ever been. The statistics say that there are more kids going to the ER for anxiety and for suicide attempts than there are for broken bones and stitches. It's flipped. A huge source of that anxiety is fear. They don't know what's next. They don't see the hope that is the next day. They don't see their hope in Jesus. And you guys, need someone to point you in the right way. You need someone who can speak wisdom into your life when you are losing hope. You need someone who can lift you up and encourage you when things seem hopeless. The third thing is blind spots. We all have them. We all have blind spots where we think we're doing something right, and in reality, it's going to really tear us up, and we just don't see it. We need someone who's gone before us that can call us out of that. Sociologist Christian Smith coined a phrase, moralistic therapeutic deism. All right, I'm going to say that one again because it's a big one. Moralistic therapeutic deism. And it's extremely prevalent. It is the primary belief system in all students that attend church. All right? Hear that again. It's the primary belief system in all students who attend church. And the basic tenets of it are this, that God exists as creator, but he's more of an observer than an interactor. God wants us to be good, that the goal of life is happiness, and that God is only called upon when we have an issue. And to go to heaven, you just got to be a good person. That is not the gospel. That is not the gospel. And this generation needs those who have walked out the gospel a little longer than they have to point them in a true, proper direction. Because when you're in something like that, you don't see the errors in your beliefs. But they need people who know better, who have seen better, who have walked it out to point them in the right direction. The gospel demands are lost when our focus is on ourself and our goodness over the goodness of God and what he has done. I like to hike, and there's these things called cairns. I was going to name my son Karen, but I figured he would hate me later in life for it if I did. It's Karen with a C-A-I-R-N instead of K. And cairn is a pile of rocks, and here's a picture of one. This is on Mount Washington, and you can see in the distance these piles of rocks that just wind their way up the mountain. And the goal of these rocks is to mark the way, to mark the trail, to mark the path. Because in this life, paths are never straight. They're never as easy as we think they're going to be. They're never as straight as we want them to be. And so we have these markers that are laid out on the road of life. And if you notice, it's not a small pile. Those signs, that sign that you see right there, usually are about this high. So they're eye level. So that rock stack is higher than eye level. Many, many people have walked this path before, and a lot of times when you see those, you'll see people pick up a rock, put another one on top of it. Pick up a rock, put another one on top of it. A lot of people have walked this path and placed those cairns along the trail. And at first you look at it and you're like, that's a lot of piles of rocks. And why are they so close? Who needs, it's obvious the next one's, why do they need one between? They're 10 feet apart, right? But here's what happens, especially on Mount Washington. This is a picture from the same trail. When the weather turns. When the weather turns, you need those piles. You need those markers. You need those cairns in your life to mark out that trail. And you could even barely make out the next one. You can see the one right in the bottom right of the picture, but you can barely make out the one that's back to the left. It's the same way for us as we walk through life. We need people that when we are lost in this storm, it doesn't sometimes, we don't see it when the skies are clear and it's blue sky and perfect out. But when the storms are going, we need someone who can say, hey, this is the way, who can mark that path and mark that trail. The treasure chest thing. We often like to store up things for ourselves. And Jesus said that your treasure is in heaven. Who dies with the most toys still dies, right? It's the way it goes. But in reality, our treasures is who we are, the experiences that God has put in front of us in our life. And so the question is, what are we going to do with the most valuable thing we have? What are we going to do with the most valuable things that we have? Which is those experiences, that wisdom, that opportunity you have to leverage your life experience for the benefit of those coming behind you. What are you going to do with the most valuable thing you have? Are you going to let it die with you, or are you going to pass it along? The value of a life is measured by how much of it you give away. Not by how much of it you keep, by how happy you are at the end, but by how much of it you give away. And the truth is, the older you are, the more you have to give. The older you are, the more you have to give. We need to shift the culture. We need to change the pace so that it's not focused on the youth, not saying don't focus on these guys. I'm saying so it's not focused on the youthful abilities, on being wrinkle-free, on being super strong and not hurting after a hard day's work. We need to focus on the wisdom that comes with age and leveraging that wisdom for the benefit of those who are coming behind us. And I think if we don't, we'll regret it. But if we do, we'll never regret it. If we do, we will raise up a generation that is stronger than our own because they've had someone walking with them to point out the errors in their ways. Pray with me. Lord, I thank you. I thank you for your word and for the way your word tears at the core of who we are. And not in a bad way, but Lord, this peels away the layers so that we can come more and more before you and open our hearts to the joy and the hope that you have for us. Lord, that you can renew us through your word and through the wisdom of the people that you have placed in our lives. Lord, that we'll be open to the wisdom of the generations that are going before us. And Lord, that we will seek out those who are coming behind us so that we can encourage them and walk with them. In it's your son's name we pray. Amen.
Amen. You stand up with us this morning as we have an extended time of worship.